productivity of the UK. We have undershot all our major competitors for 2 decades or more, and that is because we have a low-wage, low-cost approach where a business does not invest in skills, does not invest in capital or facilities. Look at the road haulage industry that we're talking about. The fact is that they haven't been putting money into truck stops, into conditions, into pay. So there's no supply of young people in this country who, frankly, at the moment are thinking of becoming truck drivers.
You have made that point very clearly, and I'm going to make it.
So that was the Prime Minister on the Today programme this morning on Radio 4, suggesting that businesses could have done more to prepare for this moment. And there's been a little bit of a build-up to this. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss began when she said the Prime Minister is not responsible for what's on or not on supermarket or shop shelves. Kwasi Kwarteng, the Business Secretary, said that businesses have been over-reliant on too few suppliers and left themselves exposed, whilst a government source told the Telegraph business section that business has become drunk on cheap labour. We've had a couple of texts as well. I'm going to talk to Shane Brennan, who is the Chief Executive of the Cold Chain Federation. Shane, morning to you.
Good morning.
Morning. Tell me what the situation is that you're seeing.
We're definitely seeing one of the most stressful and difficult times in our food supply chain we've ever seen. Certainly the worst phase of the coronavirus pandemic period. And I really feel for the people, whether it's the warehouse operatives, the drivers, the business owners and leaders who are trying to sort of find ways through the crisis they're facing right now in managing the supply chains they're responsible for.
Also, we've got Richard Tice, who's a businessman who works in real estate and is the leader of the political party Reform UK. Richard, tell me the angle you're coming in from.
Good morning. Well, the Prime Minister I think he's been listening to what I've been saying for many, many months. It's a rare occasion when I agree with him. The reality is that big business and the lobby groups, they have campaigned to keep EU freedom of movement open. They've been able to pay wages, low wages to lorry drivers because they've had cheap, low-skilled immigration coming in from Eastern Europe. So the pay rates of people like lorry drivers, really have been suppressed over the last decade or more. And in a sense, the negotiating leverage has now moved in favour of the lorry drivers and away from big businesses that previously have made big profits. And it's actually not just the pay rate. It is about the truck facilities. It's about the bureaucracy of some of the paperwork. It's about the changes to the tax laws that the government was told about, what's called IR35. There's a multitude of reasons. But actually, this big business knew this was coming. And what have they done? They've sort of reached for the cheap thing they want, which is more people, lorry drivers coming from Eastern Europe. The reality is they're not sitting on their backsides in Europe. There's a shortage of drivers across the whole of Europe. There's a supply chain issue actually across, it seems, the whole of the world. But this is, in a sense, as I say, the negotiating leverage has moved in favour of the least well off, the lowest paid. And for those of us who campaign for Brexit, this is one of the dividends that I'm delighted to see.
Sorry, go on.
It's good news that big businesses are having to face up to their responsibilities.
So it's their responsibility.
Correct. It's not the government's.
Shane.
I mean, that's the message of this week, isn't it? You're on your own business. Sort it out for yourselves, and you're to blame if you don't. Of course, the vast majority of haulage businesses are not big businesses. They're small businesses operating off very, very low operating margins. And I think most of the people who run haulage companies, drivers themselves normally, would love and really want to give their drivers a pay rise. They're going to have to pay more, charge more for their services into everybody else. And those inflationary pressures are going to play out across the economy. And I think one of the things we need to start doing now is that we're going to be absolutely clear about this is now the political and economic strategy of the government. Let's start defining what low pay means. Because it's not really clear to anyone working in business what a low, apart from you know it when you see it, there's not really a lot of clarity on what low pay is. And if we start inflating wages by 20, 30, 40%, like we're seeing right now, I mean, what does that mean for the rest of wage in the economy? And brilliant, high wage, high productive economy in the end, but the short-term transition to that, the medium-term transition to that, can be really disruptive and going to create significant inflationary pressure in the economy. Maybe that's the price worth paying, but there's a huge amount of disruption going to come from that we have to basically be alive to.
In the meantime, the Prime Minister has said the rules will be relaxed to allow more HGV drivers from the EU to arrive. The target was set, immediately, 300. And I think we learnt this morning it's 127 that have applied. We can't even fill the gaps, can we?
This was a scheme that was put in place 10 days ago. It's a very, very complicated scheme, lots of paperwork involved in being part of that scheme, and basically it involves finding the idea that you can actually have people available via that visa scheme within 6 working days. It's really it suggests that the system's set up to fail rather than actually genuinely being part of a comprehensive plan for transitioning from where we are today to where we want to get to.
Richard, talk to me then about when we're hearing the likes of Lord Wolfson, Simon Wolfson, Brexiteer, boss of Next, urging politicians to allow people from overseas over here. Are voices like this helpful?
Well, I mean, everybody's entitled to a voice, of course, but I think the reality is, and you've just heard about the point about low pay. Let the market talk, and what's happened is people in offices, have actually seen much higher pay rises over the last decade or so than people doing manual jobs, driving jobs, warehouse jobs. What we're seeing now is a reversal of that, and so the market will speak, and where there's a shortage, people can't find employees to do jobs, then the pay rates have to go up and businesses will have to respond to it. And I agree.
It's not going to happen immediately, is it?
Well,
can businesses afford this right now?
Completely the opposite, actually. What does happen is if you're short of drivers, then you've got to pay more to get drivers in. If you're short of warehouse,
so then the public then the consumer should then accept that prices will go up.
Well, either that, or businesses will find other ways of dealing with it, or they'll accept smaller profit margins, or they can accept smaller profit margins.
What about small family businesses?
They can adjust the routes that they use.
What about stretched small family businesses?
Look, everybody, margins everywhere can vary, but the reality is you can't. It's not the government's fault that the market isn't working. Ultimately, pay rates are determined by the availability of labour. It's a basic economic rule. If there's not enough labour, pay rates go up. That's what happens. And big businesses have suppressed small haulage firms for many, many years, and now they're realising the cost of that, and they're going to have to pay the difference. It really is. It is basic economics. And was it ever
government's responsibility to recognise that was the situation?
It's not the government's responsibility to determine pay rates for lorry drivers. It is the government's responsibility to make sure that lorry drivers can have that they can get tested, they can have their tests updated, and to remove unnecessary bureaucracy by things like what's called the Certificate of Professional Competence, which is, as I understand it, an EU piece of bureaucracy that frankly is not needed so much, and to reduce the cost of that.
One of the things is we've spoken to lorry drivers on 5 Live many times, and they've spoken about the conditions. No rest stops, for example. It may sound like a small thing, but is that infrastructure, the network, is that government's responsibility?
Again, no, of course it's not. That's the petrol stations, that's the service stations. They're all private-run businesses. I think we do need to understand. Stop looking to the government for solutions. We live in a free market, entrepreneurial economy, and businesses have got to work this out. Businesses own the service stations, they own the forecourts, the petrol stations, provide some facilities, welcome drivers. What we've learned in this COVID crisis is actually very often it's people, workers with some of the toughest, most difficult, often least attractive jobs who are absolutely critical key workers to keeping the whole show on the road. And we've got to respect them, we've got to look after them better, and we've got to pay them more. And I think it's really good news that finally, the penny has dropped and people are waking up to this.
So Shane, is it right that the government now says, look, you are on your own, with the argument that Richard's put forward?
Is it right or wrong? It's the message that business leaders have taken from this week. So for the next few months, basically the message is you're on your own to sort it out. And that is what it is. So we have to deal with that in terms of increased costs across the supply chain, increased pay rise inflation, and all those different elements that come alongside that. I would take issue with this thing about truck stops and the issues around that. The HGV companies and haulage companies in the UK are not the ones that are responsible for the road infrastructure and the service areas and the like that we have.
No, Richard was saying it's the service, it's the petrol stations and the service providers.
Yeah, but when we talk about the comparison to places like European countries where they've got wonderful HGVs, those areas, those are part of the road network. Those are part of the infrastructure investment of the country And they're the ones that have been doing that over 20, 30 years. We've failed to do that. And that is actually a government responsibility, or at least a government coordination responsibility, in order to make that sort of thing happen. Because it's not going to happen. It's not happened in other parts of the world without that. And so we do need to think about that going forward. So government can't wash its hands of every single part of this issue. They can make the point that the business is to blame and the business has got to sort it out. But they've also got to accept that they won't be able to sort out every problem. And that will be the reality of it.
A couple of people getting in touch. Peaked in the High Peak says, I don't really understand Boris blaming businesses for causing a low wage culture. Surely this is what conservatism is based on. The free market economy ideology is based on business being run ultimately for profit and to make people rich, as opposed to the good of society. Someone else has messaged, the use of cheap imported labour has been going on for years. Before retiring, I worked in the IT industry. Companies did not want to invest in UK workers when it was cheaper to employ foreign workers. I've seen this approach by nearly all industries, and it's good that the government is taking a stand on this. Mike says, PM now blaming everyone but himself for the crisis. Was he really blaming foreign drivers for not coming forward earlier? Utterly useless. Richard, in the short term, you've spoken about the long term, and you can see some listeners agreeing with what you're saying in terms of companies taking responsibility for employing more UK workers and with better wages. But in the short term, this isn't going to happen. So what happens then? What do we see this side of Christmas?
I think what you should see is some easing of restrictions, for example, which can be done in a safe way on the working hours of lorry drivers. You can increase that, again, on a temporary basis. So there's more capacity. People can work a bit longer, obviously within safe rules. Things like that need to happen. Reduce the levels of bureaucracy. And I do think that businesses will adjust. They will adapt. They will find ways through it, because actually our logistics industry is it's incredibly sophisticated, very well organised, very bright people. I'm confident actually they will find ways to deal with it, they will get through it, and that actually the shelves will fill up again. Yes, there's going to be a bit of bumping and boring, and yes, we may not get 4 different types of cornflakes on the shelves that we've become used to in recent years and months, but to be honest, that's actually not the end of the world. We're still an incredibly lucky nation. There'll still be plenty on the shelves for Christmas. I'm absolutely sure of that.
What do you make of this? We're not even a year in, and the Brexiteers, like Richard, are blaming everyone and anything but accepting Brexit was overpromised and under-delivered. There is that point of view that actually Brexit is a significant cause of this. You say that the industry is sophisticated and one of the best in the world. I think that's what you said. But there will always be demand for foreign workers. And while that demand is there, has Brexit made that too difficult when times are tough, like now?
Look, the numbers are really very small. As I understand, it's about 12,000 EU lorry drivers. Less than a couple of years ago, out of a total of around about just under 300,000. It's around 5%. It's not the game changer that's being put. And I'm sorry, the point is that lower wages are going up. That's good news for the least well off. That's part of the Brexit dividend. I'm delighted by that.
What, were we warned about this? Were we told this would happen post-Brexit? Did you expect it?
I was saying throughout the whole campaign and in recent years that actually, we need to stop lots of low-skilled, uncontrolled immigration, because that was suppressing wages of British workers. And what this has shown is that I was right. It's proved the point. Wages are going up. And that's actually why, a lot of people who voted Brexit from all over the country, they knew in their gut something was wrong. And this has proved the evidence. It's proved it's right. And it's good news for the lowest paid, the least well off.
Shane, how well received is this going to be? It will be tough. I mean, it will be tough for a few months this side of Christmas. Do you think people will understand that? Do you think the industry is prepared to cope with that?
So we've coped with supply chain shortages and supply chain interruptions throughout the pandemic. I think the people that are running the supply chain are the people we have to bear in mind here. The people who are working currently, understaffed. They've been working in crisis mode for 18 months. And I really take exception to Richard saying the solution is to just work longer hours if you're a driver. as though that the people that are doing the job today need to be working even harder than they've already been working. That is not a solution. That really undermines the confidence of people on the front line that they actually have got people who've got their back. So businesses
Richard.
I'm not saying they weren't working hard. I'm just saying there's you ask for a short-term solution. The short-term solution is to work some longer hours. I'm not saying they're not working hard. Of course they're working hard.
So, but this is the key thing. Basically, business owners, business leaders, and again, the Prime Minister's message today is your business leaders, you're on your own to sort this out. They've got a welfare problem. They've got to look after the people that work for them. They've worked hard for 2 years now in crisis mode, trying to keep the supply chains running. They've got to carry on doing that right the way through Christmas and beyond. We've got to find ways to reduce the pressure on them. And Richard's right, yes, it is about range. It's about putting less on the shelf in terms of range. It's about being more efficient in what we put out there. And consumers are going to have to accept that there's going to be less choice on the shelf at Christmas time. There's going to be more interruptions from one day to the next in supply. There will be plenty of food. Consumers need to be responsible and think about those people in the supply chain when they're making their purchasing decisions, because the worst thing is overbuying, because that then creates greater problems, intensifies crises. We have to accept that we are still in the pandemic, we're still in the adjustment from Brexit, and we're going to have to bear with that for a number of months now, right the way through Christmas and into next year.
What are people saying to you, Shane, in the industry? What are they saying in terms of, are they optimistic? Have they kind of got that, right, head down, it's difficult, we'll get through this? Are they saying that?
Well, that is the job of a supply chain person, solve supply chain problems, but they are very tired, Naga. We are talking about people who are mentally exhausted from the pressure of the unprecedented period of the last 2 years. And whilst there's this desire to move on, a politician's desire to move on, a desire to say that things are going to be better tomorrow, and we all hope that, but right now that's not how it feels. Right now we are still in the intense period of this supply chain crisis, and we need to be working together to relieve that pressure and not playing blame games, which is what we're effectively doing for the last few days at Party Conference.
Tim from Suffolk says, to be fair, the government was telling businesses for years to get ready for Brexit. The industry knew there was a shortage and should have raised salaries and conditions to attract more drivers. Maybe the industry should pay for the army, bailing them out.
The industry is paying for this. We're all seeing huge price inflation already. We're seeing huge wage inflation happening across the supply chain. That is going to happen. And that is potentially the right endpoint. The long-term implication of this may be really good. Supply chain has been undervalued in the UK for a long time. I agree with that sentiment. But the path from where we are today to that point is incredibly disruptive, and it's people on the front line of this that suffer from that. So the key is having a coherent plan that's about managing that transition is the key. And the point of the last few weeks is the government saying it's not our problem. The industry, you're on your own to do that transition. So they will do that. But there will be implications for consumers. There will be implications for everybody else, and we have to be accepted. It's not all going to be the consequences of this are probably not properly being seen in the whole, rather than sort of dealing with what the latest newspaper headline.
Shane, Brennan, Chief Executive of the Cold Chain Federation, an industry body which represents transporters of chilled food. Thank you. Richard Tice, businessman who works in real estate, the leader of the political party Reform UK. Thank you very much as well.